Susan Wright. Jeff Wright. A perfect suburban life in Houston, destroyed in a night so violent, it shocked an entire country. A quiet house, two children asleep nearby, and inside that same home, a crime so brutal it would later be counted in numbers too disturbing to ignore. 193 stab wounds. A buried body. A fountain hiding the truth in plain sight. This is not just a murder story. This is a case where reality split into two versions, and no one could agree which one was true. Hello, welcome to Dark Mind Files, your ultimate destination for deep, disturbing, and real crime stories. If you like our work, please like this video, share with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe our channel. In a quiet neighborhood of Houston, the home of Susan Wright and Jeff Wright stood as a symbol of stability, the kind of place people passed without a second thought. The lawn was always trimmed, the walkway clean, and the windows reflected sunlight in a way that made everything seem calm and secure. It was the kind of house that blended into its surroundings perfectly, never drawing attention, never raising suspicion. From the outside, their life appeared carefully arranged. Two children added warmth to the image, often seen playing in the yard, bringing a sense of life and normalcy to the quiet street. The routine of the household followed a predictable rhythm, one that gave the impression of order and control. Nothing seemed out of place. Nothing suggested chaos. But appearances can be deceiving in the most subtle ways. Beneath the calm surface, there were signs that did not immediately stand out, but slowly began to form a pattern. Small shifts in behavior, moments of silence where there should have been ease, and an atmosphere that felt heavier than it should. These were not things easily noticed by outsiders, but they existed, quietly shaping the environment inside the home. The sense of perfection was not natural. It felt maintained, as if it required effort to keep everything looking the way it did. Over time, that effort became part of the structure itself, invisible but constant. What others saw as a peaceful life may have been something far more controlled, something held together not by comfort, but by pressure. And in that pressure, something was building, slowly, silently, and inevitably. The changes were not loud enough to attract attention, but they were steady. Days passed with the same routines, yet something beneath them felt different. The house still looked the same from the outside, but inside, the atmosphere carried a quiet tension that never fully disappeared. It was not something that could be easily explained. It was something that had to be felt. Susan Wright began to seem more distant over time. Her presence remained, but her expressions no longer matched the life around her. There were longer pauses before simple actions, moments where she seemed lost in thought, as if weighing something invisible. It was not dramatic enough to alarm anyone, but it was noticeable in small, fleeting ways. Jeff Wright appeared unchanged to those who only saw the surface. The routine continued as expected, reinforcing the idea that nothing was wrong. Yet the balance inside the home felt uneven, as if one side carried more weight than the other. There were no loud arguments echoing through the walls, no visible signs that something was breaking. Instead, there was control, quiet, steady, and constant. The kind of control that does not announce itself but shapes everything around it. Over time, the silence became more telling than noise ever could. It suggested that whatever was happening inside that home was being contained, carefully kept from reaching the outside world. The normal life that others saw may have been real in appearance, but it was not complete. Something was being held back, and the longer it stayed hidden, the more powerful it became. Growing beneath the surface where no one else could see it. January 13th, 2003 arrived without warning, carrying nothing unusual on its surface. The neighborhood remained quiet, the house unchanged from the outside. There were no signs that anything different was about to happen. Inside, however, the calm structure that had held everything together for so long began to collapse in a single night. In the bedroom, Jeff Wright was restrained in a way that suggested control had already been established before anything else unfolded. What followed was not a brief or impulsive act. It stretched into something prolonged, something that moved far beyond a single moment of fear or reaction. The violence did not stop when it could have. It continued, building into something overwhelming. The number would later define the entire case, 193. Each count adding to the sense that whatever happened in that room could not be explained easily. It was not just an action. It was a sequence that kept going long after the initial moment had passed. The repetition itself became part of the mystery, raising questions that had no simple answers. When the movement finally stopped, the silence returned just as suddenly as it had disappeared. The room, once ordinary, had become the center of something irreversible. But the night did not end there. Instead of chaos, what came next was controlled. The scene did not remain as it was. Decisions were made, actions were taken, and the situation shifted from violence to concealment. The transition was as unsettling as the act itself. By the time the night was over, nothing inside that house was the same. Yet from the outside, everything still appeared untouched, as if the darkness within had never existed at all. What happened after the violence was not chaotic or rushed. It unfolded with a strange sense of order, as if each step had already been considered. Inside the house in Houston, the signs of what had taken place were not left behind. The space was managed, cleaned, and returned to a state that would not immediately raise suspicion. It was as if the night had been carefully folded away, hidden from view. The body of Jeff Wright did not remain inside for long. It was moved from the room where everything had happened, taken beyond the walls that had contained the violence. The backyard, once a simple extension of family life, became part of something much darker. The ground was disturbed in a deliberate way, shaped into a place meant to conceal rather than reveal. The burial was not careless. It showed effort, intention, and time. Soil was packed down firmly, leaving little to suggest what lay beneath. On top of that hidden space, a fountain was installed. Water began to flow, creating a calm and almost comforting image. It drew attention to itself in a way that distracted from everything below it. The gentle sound of water masked the silence underneath. Days passed, and the house returned to its routine. Susan Wright continued moving through daily life without visible disruption. The children remained in the home, the surroundings unchanged. From the outside, there was no indication that anything had happened. The disappearance itself became part of the illusion. Without a visible presence, questions slowly began to form. But at first, there was only quiet, and within that quiet, the truth remained buried, hidden beneath something designed to look peaceful. The silence did not last forever. Gradually, small inconsistencies began to surface, the kind that seem harmless at first but grow heavier with time. The absence of Jeff Wright started to feel unusual. Days turned into a pattern of unanswered questions, and the normal rhythm of the household no longer made complete sense. Concern slowly replaced assumption, and attention began to shift toward what was missing rather than what was visible. When investigators turned their focus to Susan Wright, the story that emerged changed the direction of everything. She presented a version of events rooted in fear and survival, describing a life shaped by control and tension. According to her account, the night had not been planned. It had been the result of something that finally broke after building over time. The explanation introduced a layer that could not be seen in the physical evidence alone. But the details collected from the scene told a different kind of story. The restraints suggested preparation. The number of wounds suggested intensity that went far beyond stopping a threat. The burial and the effort to conceal it pointed toward actions taken with awareness and purpose after everything had ended. These two narratives stood in direct conflict. One described a reaction shaped by fear. The other pointed to a sequence that appeared deliberate from beginning to end. As investigators worked through each piece of evidence, the gap between those explanations only grew wider. Nothing aligned cleanly. Each answer created new questions, and each question deepened the uncertainty. What had seemed like a single event was becoming something far more complicated, something that could not be understood from just one perspective. The courtroom became the place where every hidden detail was brought into the open, but instead of clarity, it created more uncertainty. What seemed like a straightforward case outside now unfolded into something layered and difficult to define. The focus was no longer just on what happened that night, but on everything that may have led up to it. The prosecution built its case around structure and sequence. Each step taken inside the house was presented as part of a controlled chain of actions. The restraints, the repeated violence, and the careful concealment afterward were arranged into a narrative that suggested planning rather than panic. To them, the number itself, 193, was not just evidence. but a symbol of intent that could not be ignored. On the other side, the defense shifted attention away from the physical details and toward the unseen past. They introduced the idea that long-term emotional strain could shape how a person reacts in a critical moment. Instead of focusing only on the final act, they emphasized what might have been building silently over time. The argument suggested that the night was not an isolated event, but the result of accumulated pressure reaching a breaking point. A reconstruction of the scene became a turning moment. It forced those in the courtroom to visualize the sequence differently, not just as observers of evidence, but as people trying to understand the state of mind behind it. This shifted how the same facts were interpreted. Outside the courtroom, the public followed closely. Opinions formed quickly, but they did not align. Some saw a calculated act hidden behind a narrative. Others saw a person overwhelmed by circumstances. The case no longer had one clear direction. It had split into two realities, each supported by the same set of facts. When the decision finally came in 2004, it did not bring the sense of closure many had expected. The courtroom settled on a conclusion, but outside of it, the uncertainty remained. Susan Wright was found guilty of murder, a verdict that acknowledged the act but stopped short of defining it as the most extreme form of intent. The sentence, 25 years in prison, seemed firm, as if it placed a clear line under everything that had been argued. For a moment, it appeared that the case had reached its end. The evidence had been presented, the arguments made, and the legal system had delivered its answer. But the story refused to settle into something final. Instead, it continued to shift in ways that kept the questions alive. Soon after, a review of the case introduced another turn. The focus moved toward what may not have been fully considered during the original proceedings. Elements tied to the past, particularly claims of long-term strain and alleged abuse, were brought forward again. These factors, once part of the debate, now became central to re-evaluating the outcome. The result was a reduced sentence, 20 years instead of 25. It was not a reversal, but it was enough to reopen the discussion. For some, this change felt like a necessary correction, an acknowledgement that the full picture had not been seen the first time. For others, it created doubt about a decision that had already been made. Rather than ending the debate, the adjustment deepened it. The case remained suspended between two interpretations, neither fully replacing the other, leaving the final meaning unresolved. Years passed, but the case never fully faded into the background. Even as attention moved elsewhere, the question stayed attached to it like a shadow that refused to disappear. In 2014, Susan Wright was released on parole after serving about a decade in prison. Her release marked the end of the legal process, but not the end of public debate. The house in Houston no longer carried the same image it once did. What had been seen as an ordinary family home had transformed in memory into something symbolic. The backyard, the fountain, and the hidden ground beneath it became part of a story that people still tried to understand in different ways. Time softened the details, but it did not resolve them. The same facts continued to support opposing interpretations. The number 193 remained at the center of discussion, not because it changed, but because its meaning never settled into a single explanation. It stood between two ideas that could not fully merge, one of fear and one of control. For some, the case represented the breaking point of a life shaped by pressure that no one else fully saw. For others, it remained an example of deliberate action followed by calculated concealment. Neither view completely replaced the other. What made the case last in public memory was not only what happened, but the absence of a definitive answer. Every attempt to define it clearly seemed to create new uncertainty instead. Even after years had passed, the story continued to be revisited in discussions, analysis, and interpretation. It remained suspended between understanding and doubt, never fully resolved, never fully closed. And that is the story of a marriage that looked normal from the outside, but ended in one of the most debated domestic cases in modern true crime history. A case where every fact leads to two different conclusions, and where certainty simply does not exist. Thanks for watching. Subscribe our channel for more gripping videos.